Destiny 2 is pretty dry right now, so in today's video I've compiled 3 of some of my favourite Warlock builds for the Ash and Iron season, and all 3 of these builds will be featured in this video with dim links down below and also separate links to the individual video if you want to go and watch it by itself to get a full understanding of that build. But without further ado, let's get straight into this video and let's cover the 3 best and funnest Warlock builds currently in the Ash and Iron sandbox. However, the Eunoia exotic is by far the most powerful I've ever felt on a Warlock for quite some time now, and this build will excel in all that middle, expert, master, grandmaster content where, you're just completely overpowered. If you're doing solo ops, fire team ops, pinnacle missions, this build is just completely busted, and let me jump straight into it and explain exactly why. So just a couple keywords here to get you interested in this build, and as you can already see from the footage in the background, this build is definitely busted. So straight away, you are going to have restoration ×2 permanently as long as there are enemies around you. So you're pretty much never going to die because you're going to have the best heal restoration ×2 on you permanently. You're going to be scorching and ignitions are going to be going off absolutely everywhere on the battlefield, pretty much just infinitely killing everything. You're going to have a full tool set to stun any champion in the game, unstoppable, overload, or even anti-barrier. You're going to have that covered, and not to mention, it's just extremely fun to be absolutely blowing everything up as a Warlock main, and that's what you should be doing. So to get this build started, obviously we need to be using the Warlock exotic Eunoia. This is the brand new one. If you want to know how to get it, the easiest way to do it is head over to Kepler and do the sieve activity as soon as it is available. Once you do it once, it just guarantees you the new exotic for that subclass, giving you the Eunoia. Now, what this exotic does is it improves our Hellion aspect. As it reads, Hellion projectiles deal increased damage the further they travel, eventually fracturing into scorching shrapnel. Now the Hellion aspect is already pretty strong for Warlocks. It's just a passive buddy that goes around and deals pretty good damage, and if enough stacks go onto it, it will eventually cause an ignition. Now the best thing I love about this build, it is a very passive build that doesn't take much concentration at all. You have to use exactly 3 abilities, you can even dummy it down to 2 abilities, and this build practically plays for itself. Now the whole gameplay loop around this build is basically use your Hellion to proc ignitions across the battlefield, using your weapons to apply more scorch stacks, and your abilities to keep you alive, applying in some armor mods here to get your abilities back, and just spam out your abilities and cause massive ignitions across the battlefield. So I'm going to jump into the subclass here to give you a quick idea of how the build will work, and then I'm going to go ahead and go into the simple rotation that you need to do to make this build work to its full potential. So as for the subclass, you want to be running pure, strictly solar to make full advantage of some of the fragments in there to make this build as good as it can be. So Song of Flame is my go-to favorite super in the game, so definitely run that if you wish. This also gives you the option to run Well of Radiance if you're in a sort of, pinnacle, fire team activity where you need a well, you can do that too. As for the abilities, you want to be running Phoenix Dive. It's got the shortest cooldown out of Healing Rift and Empowering Rift, allowing you to get Hellion out as much as you possibly can. Paired this with Incinerator Snap and a Fusion Grenade. We're running Fusion Grenade because it has the shortest cooldown apart from Firebolt, but Firebolt is useless in PvE. So run Fusion Grenade for the shortest cooldown grenade, which I'm going to get into in just a second. As for the aspects, obviously Hellion here, and also Heat Rises. Now we're running Heat Rises because it allows you to proc Restoration by yourself. Now the easiest way to proc Heat Rises and Restoration is to consume your grenade, being the Fusion Grenade, and then use your Phoenix Dive to spawn your Hellion. Consuming your grenade, proccing Heat Rises, and then using a Phoenix Dive will give you Restoration ×2 for 3 seconds. Now in this 3 seconds, we have a very short window, being 3 seconds, to get a kill or an ability final blow with solar abilities, due to the fact we will be running Ember of Empyrean. Getting solar final blows will then extend this restoration ×2 up to as many kills as you get. So each kill will give you about a second of restoration ×2. So quickly chaining as many solar kills as you can will bump this up as much as possible, up to a maximum of 15 seconds. Once it's stacked up above 10 seconds, it's extremely easy to keep this active. Anything to do with solar, ability, or weapon final blow will just keep extending this duration, allowing us to have restoration ×2 practically infinitely. Now once this is going, this is basically the build going. You've got Hellion by your side, just scorching and killing and igniting everything next to you, which will then also be double stacking and refreshing restoration constantly. And pairing this with some grenades and throwing out a few melees, this is basically the whole build. You've got infinite restoration, you're igniting everything on the battlefield, everything is dying, and it's just absolutely satisfying as hell, surviving and blowing everything up. Now, with the help of a couple other fragments, it's going to make this build even better. So Ember of Ashes here, you apply more Scorch stacks to targets. This is very basic. This just allows these ignitions to go off quicker and faster because we're applying more Scorch per solar application. Obviously, I mentioned before we're running Ember of Imperium to allow us to extend that restoration effects applied to us to survive longer in the battlefield. Ember of Char, this allows our solar ignitions to spread Scorch to other targets. So if one enemy does ignite, it's going to spread Scorch to more enemies, causing more ignitions on the battlefield. Pretty self-explanatory here. And then our last fragment is Ember of Singeing, which allows us to get our class ability energy back every time we scorch targets, and everything we're doing is going to be scorching, so our class ability will just constantly be chaining up. Now that's pretty much the subclass and all of the fragments and aspects that we're going to be running. Now let's jump over into the second most important part of this build, which is our weapons. Now right now, the Mint Retrograde is by far the best weapon in the game. Definitely chuck that on in your kinetic slot if you have a decent god roll. Pairing this with the Anti-Barrier Scout and Pulse Rifle Artifact mod, the Mint Retrograde will allow you to deal with anti-barrier champions quite easily. In the energy slot, I'm sure a lot of us have been farming out the Yeartide Apex. This is definitely the new best solar SMG in the game, and I've definitely been taking advantage of this one. Now the god roll that I have is Demolitionist and Burning Ambition, which works extremely well with this build. Burning Ambition just allows us to scorch more targets on the battlefield, causing those ignitions. So our Hellion is going to be applying some scorch stacks, and then shooting an enemy with this SMG with the Burning Ambition perk on is going to extend those scorch stacks, apply more, and then hopefully eventually cause an ignition. Pairing this with Demolitionist allows us to get our grenade energy back really fast, which allows us to proc heat rises more often. So the Yeartide Apex, very fun weapon here to use. You can also run one with, Heal Clip and Incandescent if you wish, or even Demolitionist and Incandescent. Whatever it is, the Yeartide Apex is a very good option for this build. And finally, in our power weapon, I've been really liking the Dragon's Breath, as again, it just allows us to have more Scorch stacks on the battlefield. It also has intrinsic Unstoppable, but being a ignition-based build, we don't really need to worry about unstoppable champions because every single ignition will stop an unstoppable champion. With Ash and Iron coming out today and there being plenty of buffs, nerfs, and a whole bunch of new activities and whatnot, honestly, the most important thing that I was looking forward to was the massive buff to the Warlock subclass. In a tweet just a couple of weeks ago, Bungie announced a massive buff for Warlocks, which basically allowed the Warlock turrets to count as grenade for stats and perks. The Ionic Sentry, the Arc Soul, the Hellion, Bleak Watcher, and the Child of Old Gods will now count as a grenade stat. So basically what this means is that all of these Warlock buddies or turrets will now work and be based off what your grenade stat is. Now to simply put this, the higher your grenade stack, the more damage that these buddies are actually going to do. Anything over the 100 stat for grenade will increase the damage it does in PvE and also PvP. As you can see here, with 200 grenade energy, your buddies or your grenades will do 65% increased damage inside of PvE, which is completely busted. So your Hellions, your Arc Souls, your Bleak Watchers, your Child of Old Gods, and the Ionic Sentries will all do 65% increased damage, which is pretty massive, I will say. But like I said, even outside of the Warlock change with the buddy scaling off grenade damage, this build is still extremely useful. I've been using it all morning in this new activity, and I've just been rinsing the activities all by myself on that, -30 to try and level up my power. I've even gone up to -40 here in some of these missions. It is a great build. Make sure you try it out. So let's just quickly go over some of the key basic, benefits and bonuses of this build and why it's so much better now in the Ash and Iron update. So first of all, the Arc Soul and the Bleak Watch turret are going to get a 65% damage buff if you are running 200 grenade, which I definitely recommend for this build. Every time you do consume that grenade through the Getaway Artist exotic, you're going to be getting amplified, which gives you a straight 15% damage resistance, and it also makes the enemies less likely to hit you with their bullets, so this is just an added bonus as well. With the wise usage of both darkness weapons and also light weapons, we can build our Transcendence bar incredibly fast and use this to clear a whole battlefield of adds, or use it to weaken bosses and do extra bonus damage to them through some fragments that I'm going to go over shortly. On top of this, we will have Devour procced permanently whenever we are in combat, so we can safely be at 100% health anytime we kill anything on the battlefield, which will be happening a lot of the time, so we're almost immortal and unable to die. There's a whole bunch of other keywords like proccing frost armor and unraveling enemies for extra damage, but this just all falls together and you will feel the power of the build once you try it out. So without further ado, let's get straight into this build. So obviously today, the go-to exotic is the Getaway Artist. Now don't worry about the power here, we all know Destiny is bugged again as per usual with any updates, so it is saying 5, I don't know why, it doesn't really matter. Anyway, the Getaway Artist is the go-to exotic. Basically, if you don't know about this build, what this does is this allows you to consume your Arc Grenade and give you an Arc Soul. However, if we are running the Prismatic Warlock subclass and we pair this with the Bleak Watcher, when we consume that grenade, it's going to give us an Arc Buddy, but it will also spawn a Bleak Watcher turret. That is pretty much the basis of the build. You want to consume your Arc Grenade and give yourself these buddies. Now, stacking your grenade stat as high as you possibly can is going to increase the damage that both these turrets do. Mine is currently sitting at 165, but with the help of the Festival Flight weapon that we got, and using the perk Blast Distributor, I can give myself an extra 50 grenade stat, pairing this to then bump me up to that 200 stack. So on the battlefield, I'm shooting this around, I'm getting those 5 stacks, and this is giving me 200 grenade energy through this weapon. Now, last season, I didn't grind a bunch of tier 5 armor. I've only got really tier 4 here and there, so I can't get a 200 build grenade stat going off the rip, so I do need to use something like the Festival Flight with the Blast Distributor perk to bump myself up to 200. Now, if you've got some really good armor, definitely try and get this as close to 200 as you can. If you don't, and you're like me, chuck on a weapon that has the Blast Distributor perk. It really helps, and it allows you to flex and put some other stats elsewhere. Like myself here, I've put 146 into weapons, 60 super, and whatnot. Now let's get into the Prismatic subclass itself. Super, you can run whatever one you want. It doesn't really matter. I love Song of Flame, so that's the one I run. Phoenix Dive is a great class ability to use here because it's just an instant heal, and it helps recharge all of your other abilities through some mods that I'll go through in a minute. As for the melee, you want to be using Arcane Needle. It's just the best melee on the Warlock subclass, especially because our other aspect is Feed the Void. It allows us to proc Devour 3 times whenever we need, instantly kill an enemy and proc Devour. It's very good. Now you want to be running a Arc Grenade because the Getaway Artists need an Arc Grenade to consume to spawn that Arc Soul. Aspects, like I said before, Bleak Watcher and Feed the Void. The Bleak Watcher is to spawn that Stasis turret, and Feed the Void because it's just the best aspect to run on the Warlock. It allows us to get Devour, which will instantly heal us and keep us alive on the battlefield anytime any of our abilities get a kill. Now, because both of our turrets are now doing 65% increased damage, there's a pretty good chance that one of these turrets is going to kill something, which will count to proc Devour, or it will also count to refresh Devour, granting us full health, pretty much just keeping us alive on the battlefield 24/7. Now, as for the fragments, there is 4 major fragments you need to be running here. The first one is the Facet of Courage. This just allows our Arc, Solar, and Void abilities to do increased damage to anything that is Darkness debuffed. Now, with the Bleak Watcher on the battlefield, it's going to be freezing absolutely everything on the battlefield, applying a Darkness debuff. With our melees, unraveling enemies, that's also a Darkness debuff. So this will then allow our Arc, Solar, and Void abilities to do increased damage. Now, our Arc abilities come from the turret. Our Solar abilities probably won't really be proccing unless we're using something like Song of Flame. But our Void abilities will be our Prismatic Grenade when we do eventually throw that. As for the second fragment, the Facet of Purpose is a big one here. Picking up Orbs of Power will grant us, Bolt Charges, Restoration, Frost Armor, Woven Mail, or an Overshield based on the Super. So because we're running Song of Flame, we're going to be spawning in here Restoration whenever we pick up an Orb of Power because that's the Solar version. If you want Frost Armor, run the Winter's Wrath, whatever it is, but I like Restoration, so it's very handy. The third fragment is the Facet of Dawn. This one just makes us Radiant whenever we do chuck out a Arcane Needle. Being Radiant is great. It helps us, do increased damage, and it also stuns anti-barrier champions. And the final fragment is Facet of Dominance. This is purely for DPS. If you don't want to run this, you can definitely sub it out for something else. The Facet of Protection is really good as a substitution if you're doing that harder content or you feel like you're dying a lot more. Basically, I like running Dominance because whenever we go Transcendence, it allows our Void Grenade to weaken targets, and our Transcendence Grenade is Void, so it will instantly weaken the enemy. allowing us to do extra damage to any bosses that we encounter. But that's pretty much the subclass covered of what you need to be running. Now let's go over what you need to do when you're actually in activities to keep this build in the running state. It's extremely easy, there's not much upkeep to it. Basically, whenever you see enemies, you want to make sure you are consuming that Arc Grenade to spawn an Arc Soul and also the Bleak Watcher turret. You never want to throw out your grenade unless you desperately need, like, Devour to proc or something. You're always better off just consuming a grenade. Now, not only will consuming a grenade spawn in these turrets, but it will also amplify you, giving you a straight 15% damage resistance, and the enemies will also be less likely to hit you when they're shooting, so this is just an added bonus. But from here, once you've consumed your grenade, if you are running the blast distributor like myself, you want to be shooting that out and proccing that 50 extra grenade stat so that your, grenade is 200 and your buddies are doing extra damage. From here, run around, throw your Arcanitas out, make sure you've got, Devour procced and you're keeping that chained through weapon kills and whatnot. Always save an Arcane Needle for emergency situations if you need to reproc Devour or something. Throw out your Healing Rift or Phoenix Dive, whatever it is, and just, as soon as you get that grenade energy back, make sure you're consuming it and chucking at another Bleak Watcher turret. You can have infinite Bleak Watcher turrets if you have infinite grenade energy. They will despawn after a certain time, but if you keep chaining this over and over and over again, you can have as many Bleak Watcher turrets on the battlefield as you want until they obviously run out of time. So without further ado, this video today is going to be running over the Rime raiments Warlock exotic chest piece and how this is the new best build for Warlocks in the current sandbox, especially for those difficult mythic missions, and also pushing into those Grandmaster conquests and anything above that 300 to 400 power light level where the activities are actually quite difficult. So let's stop yapping and let's get straight into this build. Now obviously this Warlock build revolves around the exotic chest piece Rime raiment. The armor perk reads, your Bleak Watcher turrets are enhanced with extended range and are surrounded by stasis crystals and a storm. While standing in the storm, you are granted icicles over time. Icicles activate when you fire your weapons, applying slow to targets they hit. So, to put it simple, this exotic chest piece will allow you as a Warlock to turn any of your grenades into a Bleak Watcher turret if you have the Bleak Watcher aspect equipped. You no longer need to run a Cold Snap grenade or whatever it is, as long as you have the Bleak Watcher turret aspect equipped and this exotic chest piece, any of your grenades will turn straight away into a Frost turret, and it will also be enhanced due to the exotic chest piece. So as you can see here, just by me throwing this Bleak Watcher down in the shooting range here, it will instantly turn into an enhanced turret, but it will also spawn 4 crystals around it, and there'll also be a rift sort of storm in the middle. So as the exotic explained, if you stand in this storm, every shot that you fire with your gun, it will shoot an icicle with that bullet and add more damage to your rotation. On top of this, all 4 of these crystals around the stasis turret will also respawn after 15 seconds, so make sure when you do throw your grenade, you are using these crystals for damage, and then they will then respawn in 15 seconds for you to do even more damage. So the main goal of this build is pretty much just by throwing out your grenade, using this storm for extra damage, spawning crystals, and spawning stasis turrets everywhere to basically just crowd control the entire map. Everything you see is going to be either slowed or frozen, and you're then going to be shattering all these enemies for massive damage, and using all of your abilities in between, and also getting massive ability energy back to continue of spamming out these freezing turrets. Now the second exotic that we're going to be running with this build is the Scout Rifle Wicked Implement, which if you haven't got, with the new sandbox, I'm not entirely sure how you go ahead and get the Wicked Implement, but if you do have it, this is the perfect weapon to use with this build, because it is a stasis scout rifle that can obviously freeze targets. Now if you don't have this exotic scout rifle, I would recommend any other stasis primary weapon, as stasis weapons are really going to enhance this build, purely because of some factors that we're going to get into in just a little bit. Now the Wicked Implement wasn't so good, however it did recently get a slight buff, and it also got a catalyst, and it also is a featured exotic this season, so it's doing just a little bit more damage than what it usually would, and the catalyst is very, very important in making this build work even better. What the catalyst does is it will spawn a stasis crystal once you get a precision final blow. It's basically just giving the weapon headstone, and as this build revolves around shattering crystals, dealing damage and freezing targets, this is the perfect weapon for it. And not to mention, just to quickly get into one of the artifact perks we will be running is Fever and Chill, and this states rapid precision hits with stasis weapons grant frost armor. Now with the Wicked Implement being a rapid fire scout rifle, it is perfect for this artifact perk. you know, rapid fire, so it shoots really quick. It's a scout rifle, so it makes it extremely easy to hit headshots. So you're going to be constantly building up those frost armor stacks. And as you can see on the footage here, all it takes is 5 precision hits for 1 stack of frost armor. So with the Wicked Implement having a 20 round magazine, theoretically if you could hit every headshot, you will be getting up to 4 stacks of frost armor just from 1 magazine of a Wicked Implement, which is almost a 20% damage resistance. Just amazing for general ad control and play. You know, you're constantly getting headshots with this scout rifle from afar, and it's giving you frost armor. It's just 2 awesome perks here combined together, which makes the Wicked Implement very, very useful. Not to mention, this weapon also has intrinsic overload, so if you ever do some sort of conquest or grandmaster, it's a great weapon to use here to stun your overload champions. And obviously, being a stasis weapon, it's going to apply slow every single bullet, and eventually, after enough bullets, it will then freeze the target, just adding for more frozen crowd control in your gameplay loop. Now, to further this build and make it even better than what it is, let's jump over into the Prismatic Warlock subclass and run over some of the aspects, abilities, and fragments. So as for your abilities, Healing Rift is very vital here. You want to be running also Arcane Needle for 3 chances to proc Devour, and also to unravel targets and spawn tangles for whenever you need some extra damage. As for the grenade here, like I said earlier, you can run any grenade that you want to be able to spawn a Bleak Watcher turret. However, the Healing Grenade has the shortest cooldown out of all of these grenades, meaning that we can get our Bleak Watcher turret out twice as fast. And not to mention, having a healing grenade whenever you need is very, very important, especially in these mythic contents. So run a healing grenade for the increased duration of your Bleak Watcher turrets. As for the aspect, obviously Bleak Watcher and Feed the Void, just the 2 best aspects on the Warlock subclass here. Feed the Void granted you Devour, and Bleak Watcher obviously for the core build. Jumping down to fragments here, in the first fragment slot I like to run Facet of Ruin. This will increase the size and damage of our stasis shatters. So whenever we break a stasis crystal, or if we break a frozen target, it's going to increase the size and the damage of all of these shatters, just making the build do more damage, and it is very, very important. Jumping over into our next fragment, we have Facet of Protection. This will just give you a flat damage resistance whenever we are surrounded, and let's be honest, in these mythic contents, a little bit of extra DR is very, very important. However, if you're feeling like you don't need to run Facet of Protection, you can sub this out for a different fragment if you wish. However, like I said, these mythic content aren't a joke. You take a lot of damage, so it's worth running. In the third slot, Facet of Hope here is very important. Since this build doesn't really revolve around a lot of healing like our previous build does, we are going to need to be spamming out our Healing Rift whenever we can as our main source of healing outside of Devour. Facet of Hope reads, whenever you have a elemental buff, your class ability regenerates more quickly. Now, an elemental buff is any buff in the game, and luckily Frost Armor counts as an elemental buff, so this will quickly regenerate our Rift, meaning we can spam out healing rifts wherever we are on the battlefield. And our last fragment is the Facet of Devotion, which reads, defeating targets affected with stasis or strand debuffs grant bonus light transcendence energy. Now, because this build heavily revolves around freezing and shattering darkness or stasis debuff targets, we're going to be building a lot of darkness transcendence, but we won't be getting a lot of light transcendence energy. So this is our main way of getting that light side of our Transcendence bar built as quickly as possible. However, another way to do this is by putting on some sort of Void, Solar, or Arc LMG, and this will heavily impact and create that light Transcendence for us. Now moving on to our artifact perks, there are 3 main artifact perks that you want to have to make this build even better. Now the first one, which I mentioned earlier, is Fever and Chill. And basically, rapid precision hits with stasis weapons will grant us Frost Armor. So like I said earlier, running the Wicked Implement is just a free way to get Frost Armor, giving us extra damage resistance. Definitely be putting on Fever and Chill artifact perk. Now the second one is Frigid Glare, which is in the last column, which states, while Frost Armor is active, stasis precision final blows cause combatants to release a freezing burst. So this is very important. Since we're pretty much going to have Frost Armor 24/7, anytime we kill anything with our Wicked Implement and it's a precision final blow, this enemy is going to explode in a massive freezing burst, which will freeze any other enemies around them. Again, just adding more crowd control and more shatters. Very, very important artifact. And the final one is Shield Crush, which states, while you have Woven Mail or Frost Armor, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. So again, we have Frost Armor permanently, so all of our Arcane Needles will recharge quickly, allowing us to get, Devour procced more often, and they'll also increase damage, so it just makes it even easier to get that Devour procced. So these 3 Ardor perks are a must-have for this build. Definitely get those on if you haven't, or if you haven't unlocked them yet, definitely lock in and get them. And moving on to our last factor of this build, and that is our stat priority, since this is very, very important now in Destiny 2. So our first priority is Grenade. You want to have this at 100. There is no point in going over 100, because when you boost your grenade fact over 100, all it does is increase the damage of our grenades. However, in this build, we're not doing damage with our grenades, so get it to 100 for the minimum cooldown of 42 seconds. This is very important. Our second stat priority would be weapons. Get your weapons to as high as you possibly can, as long as you have 100 grenades. You know, in above that 150 is very, very good. And then once you've maxed out that, just put the rest of your stats into your class and melee stat. However, focus on grenade and weapons first, and then jump into class ability. But that pretty much rounds out the build there. The rotation is very simple. You can play this defensively or offensively. You know, you could play offensively by throwing your stasis turret at the enemies, and then using the crystals to shatter and cause damage. Or you can play defensively by spawning the crystals and the stasis turret on you, standing in the storm, and, you know, using the crystals for defense in your rift. But overall, this build has been extremely solid, and I've been destroying all of these mythic missions solo, all by myself. So make sure you definitely try out this build. There'll be a dim link down below in the description. But again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later.